Miss Amelia Carhart was not, as a general rule, prone to reckless behavior. She had spent the entirety of her 19 years being perfectly, maddeningly sensible. While other girls giggled behind their fans and dreamed of dashing officers, Amelia had been quietly managing the household accounts, soothing her mother's anxieties, and ensuring that her younger sister, Lily, did not run off with the first fortune hunter who complimented her dimples. The Carhart family fortunes, such as they were, rested squarely upon Amelia's slender shoulders, and she had never once complained. But tonight, she was tired. So very tired. She was tired of the whisper-thin soles of her only dancing slippers, which Shed had resoled so many times they were more cobbler's thread than satin. She was tired of watching Lily's eager face fall when yet another eligible gentleman glanced at her modest dowry and looked away. And she was utterly exhausted by the endless, grinding effort of appearing cheerful about it all. Which was why, when a note was slipped into her hand during a particularly tedious country dance, she did not crumple it up and toss it into the nearest punch bowl, as any sensible young lady ought to have done. Meet me in the library. 1 hour. No regrets. Just one night. The note was unsigned, but the bold, slashing handwriting was unmistakable. She had seen it before, on the lease for her father's country estate. It belonged to the new landlord, the man who now held the fate of her family in his hands. Gabriel Sterling, the Duke of Ashworth. He was not a man who inspired sensible thoughts. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell perpetually over his brow and eyes the color of a winter storm. He moved through the ballrooms of the Tun with a lazy grace that suggested he found the whole affair faintly amusing, and when he looked at a person, it was with an intensity that made them forget their own name. He was notoriously aloof, impossibly wealthy, and had a reputation for getting exactly what he wanted. And apparently, at this particular moment, what he wanted was Amelia in the library. She should throw the note away. She knew she should. A clandestine meeting with a duke was precisely the sort of disaster that would land a girl like her, penniless, respectable, and utterly without powerful relatives, in a world of trouble. If they were caught, her reputation would be in tatters. Lily's chances would be destroyed. Her mother would take to her bed for a decade. But as she watched him across the room, leaning against a pillar with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on her with unnerving precision, she felt something crack inside her. For 1 year, she had been sensible. For a lifetime, she had been good. And what had it gotten her? A pair of worn-out slippers and a future that looked decidedly bleak. He gave her the barest hint of a nod. A challenge. Amelia lifted her chin. For once, just once, she wanted something for herself. 1 hour. 1 night. No one would ever know. She slipped out of the ballroom and into the darkened hallway. The library at Huntingdon House was lit only by the dying embers of the fire and the pale moonlight streaming through the tall windows. It smelled of old leather and paper, and for a moment, Amelia felt a pang of nostalgia for her father's library in the country, before his debts had forced them to let it go. She heard the door click shut behind her. You came. His voice was low and smooth, like honey laced with whiskey. She turned to find him standing just a few feet away, his expression unreadable. You asked me to, she said, proud that her voice did not waver. I did. He moved closer, and the air between them seemed to thicken. I have watched you all season, Miss Carhart. You smile, you dance, you say all the right things. But your eyes. They never smile. I find myself wondering what it would take to make them do so. His words were a shock to her system. No one ever looked past her pleasant mask. I am a guest in your home, Your Grace. This is highly irregular. It is, he agreed, his lips curving into a faint, devastating smile. But you are here nonetheless. Which tells me that somewhere beneath that perfect, sensible exterior, there is a woman who wants more than a life of quiet duty. He was too perceptive. It was unnerving. And what if there is? She whispered. What could you possibly offer besides a scandal that would ruin my family? I offer you this, he said, stopping a hair's breadth from her. His hand came up, and his knuckles brushed against her cheek, featherlight. 1 night, Amelia. No strings. No promises of forever. Just tonight, here, with me. Tomorrow, we will be strangers again. You will have your one reckless memory, and I. He paused, his gaze dropping to her lips. I will have the pleasure of seeing those eyes of yours come alive. It was madness. It was the most insane, dangerous, utterly foolish proposition she had ever heard. And it was the most tempting thing anyone had ever offered her. No regrets, she said, echoing his note. It was a question and a statement all in one. No regrets, he confirmed. And then his mouth was on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of possession, of hunger, of a longing that had been banked for far too long. He kissed her as if he had been waiting his whole life to do so, and Amelia, for the first time in her existence, stopped thinking. She stopped calculating the consequences. She simply felt. His hands were in her hair, pulling the pins loose until it tumbled down her back. Hers were fisting in the stark white linen of his cravat, pulling him closer. The world narrowed to the heat of his body, the taste of his mouth, the low growl of approval that rumbled in his chest when she gasped his name. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around him, feeling gloriously wanton. He laid her down on the wide velvet settee before the fire, the ancient leather creaking beneath them. The firelight danced across his features, illuminating the sharp planes of his face, the raw desire in his stormy eyes. Tell me to stop, he murmured against her throat, his voice ragged. Tell me, and I will. I will walk away and never speak of this again. Amelia looked up at him, this powerful, enigmatic man who had seen through her armor and asked for nothing but this single moment. She thought of the ballroom, of the empty smiles and the endless striving. And then she thought of nothing at all. Don't stop, she whispered, pulling him back down to her. And she didn't think again for a very long time. Amelia woke to the pale grey light of dawn filtering through the library windows. For a blissful moment, she was simply warm and content, her body curled against a hard, muscular frame. Then the memories of the night before crashed over her, and her eyes flew open. He was awake, watching her. His expression was just as unreadable as it had been the night before, but there was a new tension in his jaw, a stillness to his body that hadn't been there in the dark. You should go, he said quietly, before the servants stir. Of course. This was the part where the reckless night ended and the sensible morning began. She had agreed to it. No regrets. No strings. She sat up, keeping the velvet throw pressed to her chest, and searched for her scattered clothing. He watched her for a moment, then rose with an economy of motion that was almost insulting in its efficiency. He retrieved her gown from the back of a chair and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed. He flinched. She pretended not to notice. She dressed in silence, her back to him, her movements swift and practiced. She could feel his gaze on her, heavy and intense. When she was finally presentable, her hair hastily pinned into some semblance of order, she turned to face him. He was standing by the window, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. He looked every inch the formidable duke he was, a world away from the passionate man who had held her just hours before. Goodbye, Your Grace, she said, her voice soft but steady. He did not turn around. He gave a single, curt nod. Goodbye, Miss Carhart. Amelia slipped out of the library and made her way through the silent house. She felt hollow, but she told herself it was relief. It was done. She had had her one night, and now she could go back to being sensible Amelia Carhart. No one would ever know. She let herself out a side door and walked the short distance to her own modest townhouse. She crept up the stairs to her room and collapsed onto her bed, closing her eyes. She waited for the tears to come, for the wave of regret to wash over her. But it didn't. He had given her exactly what he promised. A night of passion, of being seen, of being alive. She had no regrets. She just hadn't expected to feel so terribly, desperately alone. 3 weeks later, Amelia sat in her mother's drawing room, trying very hard not to think about a pair of storm grey eyes. She had been doing remarkably well, all things considered. She had attended 2 balls, 1 soiree, and a morning concert without bursting into tears. She had smiled until her face ached. She had even danced with a boring baron who smelled faintly of cabbage. But now, her mother had just handed her the Morning Post with a look of pure, unadulterated glee. Well, my dear, Mrs. Carhart trilled. It seems our fortunes are about to change. Amelia looked down at the heavy, cream-colored card in her hand. It was embossed with a familiar ducal crest. Her heart stopped. It's an invitation to a house party at Ashworth Manor. Her mother continued, clapping her hands together. For a whole fortnight. Oh, Amelia, this is it. The Duke must have taken a liking to you. Everyone knows he never invites anyone to his private estate. This is a singular honor. Amelia stared at the flowing script. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Carhart, Miss Carhart, and Miss Lily Carhart. The entire family. It was a command performance, not a romantic tryst. The Duke of Ashworth, it seemed, was inviting his tenants to his home. He had promised they would be strangers again. He had promised no strings. So why was he doing this? Was it pity? Was it some sort of twisted game? We cannot go, Amelia said flatly. Cannot. Her mother looked at her as if she had just suggested they take up residence in the gutter. Amelia, have you lost your mind? This could be the making of Lily. To mingle with the highest echelons of society for a fortnight. The connections alone. It was always about Lily. Or the family. Or the accounts. Amelia closed her eyes. Of course, Mamma. You are right. There was no graceful way to refuse a duke. And so, a week later, Amelia found herself stepping out of a hired carriage in front of Ashworth Manor, a sprawling, beautiful Palladian palace that made their modest townhouse look like a garden shed. The butler led them through the grand hall, and Amelia tried to focus on the magnificent art and the soaring ceilings. Anything to keep her mind off the master of the house. They were ushered into a vast drawing room, where the other guests were already assembled. And there he was. He stood by the fireplace, a glass of brandy in his hand, looking impossibly handsome in a perfectly cut coat of dark blue. He was listening to a stunning brunette who was hanging on his every word with practiced adoration. As if sensing her presence, his gaze lifted and met hers across the room. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. His eyes were unreadable, shuttered. He gave her the same faint, polite nod he would give any other guest. Then his gaze moved on, as if she were a stranger. And Amelia felt the sharp, unexpected sting of tears behind her eyes. She had gotten her one night. She had asked for no regrets. She had not expected to lose her heart in the process. The house party was a study in exquisite torture. Amelia was forced to watch as the Duke of Ashworth played the perfect, aloof host. He was charming to the ladies, affable to the gentlemen, and utterly, devastatingly indifferent to her. He never sought her out, never looked at her for longer than politeness demanded. He was keeping his word. They were strangers. She, on the other hand, was a disaster. She jumped every time she heard his voice. She knew the exact moment he entered a room without even looking up. And every night, she lay in her beautiful, canopied bed, staring at the ceiling and reliving the feeling of his hands on her skin. Lily, of course, was in heaven. She had attracted the attention of a viscount's younger son and spent her days walking in the gardens and giggling behind topiary hedges. Amelia was happy for her. She was. But it only served to highlight her own misery. On the fourth day, she escaped the organized frivolity and sought refuge in the one place she thought she might find peace, the Ashworth Library. It was twice the size of the one in London, a magnificent two-story room filled with thousands of books. She ran her fingers along the leather spines, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent. "You have a habit of turning up in my libraries, Miss Carhart." She spun around. He was standing in the doorway, his expression as guarded as ever. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," she said, her voice stiff. "I did not mean to intrude. I will leave." "Don't." The word was sharp, almost a command. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that seemed so out of character it startled her. He walked into the room, his movements restless, agitated. "I am the one who should apologize. This situation. It is untenable." "I quite agree," she said coolly. "Inviting your tenant's family to a house party after what happened, is most irregular." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You think I did this by design? You think I planned to have you here, in my home, within arm arm's reach, for a fortnight? He moved closer, and she saw the torment in his eyes. I am not a good man, Amelia. I am cold, and I am callous, and I have spent my entire life building walls to keep people out. You crashed through them in a single night. And I have been trying, desperately, to rebuild them ever since. Amelia stared at him, her heart pounding. This was not the aloof Duke. This was the man from the library. Then why did you invite us? She whispered. He was before her now, close enough to touch. His jaw was tight. Because I am a coward. I told myself it was to see if what I felt was real, if it was just the madness of a single night. I thought if I saw you here, in the cold light of day, surrounded by my world, the obsession would fade. And has it? His eyes blazed. No. It has only grown worse. Every time I see you smile at someone else, I want to roar. Every time I hear your laugh across the room, it takes every ounce of my will not to go to you. I cannot eat. I cannot sleep. I cannot think. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch desperate. Tell me I am alone in this. Tell me you feel nothing, and I will let you go. I will sell your father's lease to someone else, and you will never have to see me again. Amelia looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she saw past the wall. She saw fear. She saw hope. She saw a man who was just as terrified of this connection as she was. I have tried to feel nothing, she confessed, her voice breaking. I have tried to be sensible. But you were right. That woman you saw in the library. She wanted more. She wants you. A sound escaped him, something between a groan and a sigh of relief, and then his mouth was on hers, and it was just like that first night, desperate, hungry, and utterly, perfectly right. They were discovered, of course. Not in a clinch, Amelia had more sense than that. But the Duke of Ashworth, a man famous for his glacial reserve, was suddenly seen smiling. Genuinely smiling. At a woman with no fortune and no connections. The ton was scandalized. The other guests at the house party whispered behind their fans. The stunning brunette who had been hanging on his arm all week shot daggers at Amelia. And her mother, upon realizing what was happening, nearly swooned with a combination of horror and ecstasy. A duke, Amelia. She hissed, pulling her daughter into a corner. Are you mad? He is toying with you. Men like him do not marry women like us. Her mother's words echoed her own fears, the sensible voice she had been fighting against her entire life. But Gabriel, he had asked her to call him Gabriel, had given her no promises. He had only kissed her senseless and told her he couldn't think. The next morning, she received a note, slipped under her door. It was written in that same bold, slashing hand. Meet me in the library. Midnight. I have something I must ask you. Gee. Her heart soared. He was going to declare himself. He was going to ask her to be his duchess. It was impossible, it was insane, but the note was in his hand. He had said he couldn't live without her. She spent the day in a daze of happiness. She even felt a pang of sympathy for the other guests, who had no idea that their aloof host was about to throw his reputation to the wind for love. At midnight, she slipped down to the library. The fire was lit, the room was cozy, and he was standing by the window, just as he had been on that first morning. Gabriel, she said softly, a smile on her lips. He turned. His face was pale, his expression shuttered once more. He looked like a stranger. No, worse. He looked like the Duke. Miss Carhart, he said, his voice flat. Thank you for coming. The formality of it was a slap in the face. She stopped in her tracks. What is this? What has happened? He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded newspaper. He handed it to her. It was a scandal sheet, the worst kind of gossip rag. And there, on the front page, was a crude illustration of a woman who looked remarkably like her, entwined with a man who was clearly meant to be him, in a room that was unmistakably a library. The headline read, The Duke's Disgrace, a Night of Passion with a Penniless Nobody. The blood drained from her face. I didn't. I would never. I know you didn't, he said, his voice tight with suppressed fury. It was her. He jerked his head towards the door. Lady Jersey. The brunette. She saw us in London. She's been watching, waiting. One of the maids here was paid to talk. Amelia's hands trembled. Gabriel, what do we do? He stared at her, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. It was pity. It was regret. It was goodbye. We do nothing, he said. My solicitors will handle it. They will deny everything, and in a few weeks, another scandal will come along and this will be forgotten. Forgotten? She whispered. My reputation will be in ruins. Lily's future will be destroyed. I know, he said, and the pain in his voice was genuine. And for that, I am sorrier than I can say. I will provide for your family. Your father's debts will be paid. Your sister will have a dowry. You will want for nothing. Want for nothing? She repeated, her voice rising. I don't want your money, Gabriel. I want you. I thought. Your note. You said you had something to ask me. He flinched, as if she had struck him. I did. I was going to ask you to marry me. He laughed, a hollow, broken sound. I, Gabriel Sterling, the cold, unfeeling Duke of Ashworth, was going on bended knee to a woman I have known for a month because I cannot imagine my life without her. But I was a fool. I forgot what I am. I forgot what you are. This. He gestured to the paper. This is what happens when dukes forget themselves. I have ruined you. The only way to protect you now is to stay away. No. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, we can fight this. Together. There is no together, he said, his voice hardening with every word. There never was. It was one night, Amelia. You said so yourself. No regrets. He was throwing her own words back at her. He was using her sensible armor to destroy her. She looked at him, this man she had given her heart to, and saw only the cold, aloof duke he had always pretended to be. Get out, she whispered. Get out of my life. He gave her one last, anguished look, then walked out of the library, leaving her alone with the ashes of her dreams. A month later, Amelia sat in the small parlor of a cottage in Bath. Her mother was, predictably, in bed with the vapors. Lily was, surprisingly, bearing up remarkably well, spending her days with a new friend she had made, a vicar's daughter who shared her love of bad poetry. Gabriel had been as good as his word. The Carhart family had been quietly relocated to Bath, far from the gossip of London. Their debts were paid. A comfortable account had been set up in Amelia's name. And a notice had appeared in the papers, stating that the Duke of Ashworth, out of respect for his late father's friendship with the late Mr. Carhart, had settled a small annuity on the family. It was a brilliant lie, one that gave them just enough respectability to survive. Amelia wanted for nothing. Except him. She was staring out the window at the grey sky when a heavy knock sounded at the door. A moment later, the flustered maid appeared in the parlour doorway. Miss, there's a gentleman to see you. Before she could even ask who it was, he was there, pushing past the maid, filling the tiny parlour with his presence. Gabriel. He looked terrible. His coat was wrinkled, his hair was unkempt, and there were dark shadows under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in a month. You, she breathed, rising to her feet. How dare you come here? Get out. No. He moved further into the room. I have done everything you asked. I have stayed away. I have paid your bills. I have played the villain in your story because I thought it was what you needed. But I cannot do it anymore. I have nothing to say to you. Then you can listen. He stopped before her, his eyes blazing with that familiar fire. I lied to you, Amelia. In the library that night. I said there was no together. I was wrong. There has only ever been you. From the moment I saw you in that ballroom, looking so brave and so sad, I was lost. I didn't want a night. I wanted forever. I was just too much of a coward to admit it, even to myself. Amelia's heart clenched, but she held her ground. You threw me away. You said we were strangers. I said it to protect you. I was wrong. I see that now. I tried to fix it with money and distance, but you can't fix a broken heart with a bank draft. He reached out and took her hand. She tried to pull away, but he held tight. I love you, Amelia. I love your strength, your wit, Your maddening practicality. I love the way you sacrificed everything for your family and still had room in your heart for one night of reckless passion. I am nothing without you. I am the cold Duke you first met. You are the only one who makes me human. Tears were streaming down her face. The scandal. I don't care about the scandal, he said fiercely. Let them talk. Let them whisper. I have spent my entire life caring what people think, and it has brought me nothing but loneliness. You are the only thing that matters. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you, if you will let me. I will shout my love for you from the rooftops of London. I will dare anyone to say a word against you. He dropped to one knee, right there in the cramped little parlor. Marry me, Amelia. Not for one night. Not for one season. For forever. Let me be your family. Let me be your home. Amelia looked down at him, this proud, powerful man on his knees before her, his heart in his eyes. The sensible voice in her head was silent. For the first time in her life, there was only her heart. Yes, she whispered, sinking down to meet him. Yes. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he would never let her go. And as his lips found hers, she knew, with a certainty that went beyond all logic and reason, that this was the only thing that had ever made sense. She had wanted one unforgettable night. She had never imagined it would lead to a lifetime of them. 1 year later. The Duchess of Ashworth stood before the window of her new library, in her home, and smiled as she watched her husband chasing their new puppy across the lawn. He looked up, caught her eye, and gave her that devastating smile that still made her knees weak. Her mother had recovered remarkably well once the wedding banns were securely in place. Lily was engaged to that Viscount's younger son, and her dowry, provided by a very generous duke, had made the match a happy one for all concerned. The scandal had, as Gabriel predicted, faded away, replaced by newer, juicier gossip. But the best part, Amelia reflected, was the note that had been left on her pillow that morning. It was written in that bold, slashing hand she knew so well. Meet me in the library. Midnight. I love you. G. She turned from the window, a smile playing on her lips. Some habits, she thought, were far too good to break. And some nights, it seemed, were just the beginning. The END. If you loved this story and want more, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with a fellow romance lover, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale.